Good morning. This is Mary Conley in Jacksonville. April 25th, I believe it's Monday, yes. So the handyman is coming to look at 3 or 4 eaves on the house and small pieces of siding on the corner of the front porch, and then the paneling on the back porch. So one, two, three, and then several eaves I want replaced that have got water sogged or wood rot. Okay, so that's the agenda today. I've come across a book that has my name and photograph in it with no permissions. I don't know if that's legal to do. Um, I'm sure of the 15 or 16 encounters, 3 or 4 or 5 of them probably are legitimate. Mine is legitimate. But this woman, Erin Banks, has written a book and used my name without permission, used my photograph without permission. I don't know if that's legal. No one seems to be stopping it. The book's not selling for much. She's making a profit off of the dead women that Bundy killed. How in the hell? You make money off of dead people? Okay, she has several facts wrong. I'm 10 years, 8 months older than Leslie Parmenter. The only Parmenter I knew in 6th grade when I was 11 was a Steve Parmenter who's never mentioned and must be the older brother of Leslie Parmenter. During my 2.5 years with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, I knew Lester Parmenter, Sergeant Parmenter. He wasn't in homicide. He was Sergeant Parmenter. He had sort of strawberry blonde hair. Um, Much older, our parents' age. Okay, so that's wrong. She says, maybe in high school I heard of the encounter. The encounter with Leslie Parmenter was in 78. Debbie and my encounter was 67. Another thing she has wrong is that Debbie doesn't admit it. Debbie, when this came out in April of last year, a year ago, 2 years into my study, first of all, I opened this as an investigation. That's why I have many elements. It's 53 years ago, 54 coming on. There's a lot of dog legs and trails that lead out in different directions to try to understand why he was here. But another point is the car was pristine. That strikes me as odd because if he drove from, say, San Francisco to Jacksonville, there would have been red clay and dust on it, wouldn't there? I mean, we went across the deserts in the middle of America. It's 3,000 miles from Seattle. So he either washed that car, or it was a rental car, I believe. It had a white tag with what appeared to be black lettering and a border. I never forgot it. As far as Debbie goes, yes. She said this: I don't want my name associated with Ted Bundy. Mary, please quit obsessing about something that happened 53 years ago. Again, I'm not an English professor, but the words that happened. Her older sisters are vehement about not having this be disclosed. They're got to be in their 70s or close to it. Yes, 70 and maybe even mid-70 on Jeannie. Yes. And then she says, what does she think happened later? Well, Debbie did give a note with her phone number on. What did she do with that phone call? There was only one line back then. There were no cell phones. And as far as me saying the police would have taken a report, it would be like 50-50 if they ever came across him. And it wasn't June 17th. I was smart enough, having watched Robert Kennedy, Rosa Parks, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, that I had my civil rights too. I have the diary. Another thing, my mother is German American. My deceased mother came from Germany. She was born in Philadelphia, but they were planning on going back because they had had a major depression in Germany in the 1900s. And major, bucket loads of money that didn't, inflation, catastrophic inflation. My grandfather came and worked for the railroad. My grandmother came to Philadelphia. She wasn't supposed to have children because she had rheumatic fever or something. She was lucky to get in Ellis Island, but she had 2 more. She had Otto and she had Walter. Walter and Otto, my uncles, all deceased. So my mother stayed in Germany from the time she was born in Philadelphia, but they were going to go back to Germany. So she stayed with aunts in Germany, Wilhelmina, until she was 6 and came to America in 1933 when a madman had taken over Germany. And my grandfather, Karl Adolf Stelzer, went and picked her up, and she loved him dearly. and she couldn't speak English. So she was first born a German American. So to say the diary had something to do with some kind of intrigue in Germany is horrible. Doesn't this woman, whose name is not German, in my opinion, Stelzer's German, Starnes is German. So yes, I have German surnames. So what the hell is this Aaron Banks? That doesn't sound German at all. It sounds Bunthouse. What is a bank over there? I'm sure it's not bank. So I don't know who she is, but we have collective guilt that are German. You have to live with that on you. It's something you learn. You learn about the Holocaust. I watched Judy Garland, and she says, you're going off again. Yes, because my IQ is 133. I love Mr. Kevin Sullivan. He's worked very hard. He's a good scribe. He's a good author, but I don't think his IQ is 133. And as far as this Aaron Banks, she has a high IQ, and she's erudite or whatever. She's a wordsmith. She's has a lot of words, but it's jimbled. It doesn't make sense. What I'm saying does make sense. Debbie and I would walk up to the school. School was out. May 31st is Memorial Day in the country. That's a holiday. That was Wednesday, 1967. I've looked this stuff up. So it would have probably been June 5th, not 17th. The reason I say that is because I was looking down. When I got in the back seat, I said, there's books back here. He said, just move the books. Now, there was a conversation when I stood at the passenger side of this bright red Volkswagen. Not orange red, cinnamon red, a unique color and a unique painting system back in 1967. I've learned these things. I walked across from where I had been pretending to hitchhike, and I told Debbie I was pretending. I said, it's just pretend. No. She said, get in the car. I said, no, it's just pretend. She didn't get in first. She got in second. She lifted this little knob on the seat, which leaned it forward. I have never been in a Volkswagen except Mr. Capel, another friend from another block. Sharon Capel's father was a preacher with the Southern Law Library. You can look it up. They moved to Lake City. I went there a few times to visit with Sharon. They have lakes, and, I visited them in Lake City a couple of times because she was a childhood friend my age. You can look their names up. It's still listed because he was a famous preacher in Lake City. But he had a sort of gray tan Volkswagen, not bright tan, a darker shade of tan, and it was probably a 63 or something, and that's the only other one. I rode with him to pick their sister up in Southside one time because she had spent the night in Southside, and there were Klan members putting barricades in the road, and he said something about, to be careful what organized men do or something. They were red barricades way back then, and they actually were wearing their robes and stuff, but he said something or other. This was the era of Martin Luther King, and that's the only other time I rode in a Volkswagen. My half-sister liked Volkswagens, but she was bipolar, so I never saw her Volkswagens when she came up to visit a few times from Clay County, She was 12 years older than me, so we didn't have a lot in common. But anyway, moving on, the only Volkswagen I ever actually rode in was that red Volkswagen. I came across, Debbie was talking to the man. His hair was cut like Leave It to Beaver. It was sharp cut. But now that you mentioned it, the car was clean. And I just now realize that. So every time, I swear to God, it's a blessing of God, because every time somebody says something, I learned something new, and I just thought about that car was pristine. I mean, didn't have any red clay or sand that you would expect if somebody had just taken a 3,000-mile journey. So either he rented it here or he had bothered to clean it. His hair was cut, so he had a haircut. And when I mean like Leave It to Beaver, it was straight across the back, like the Ramone brothers in color, and he looked like Rob Lowe, is how I would say it. As far as mentioning it to Peach, over time it was mentioned it to Kathleen, another friend who lived next door to Debbie. The week following the incident, I took my little diary, which came from Woolworths. I have the diary. I sent it to a forensic analysis, and they said they couldn't make much out of it. But I've gone through the diary. I wrote it on June 17th for some reason. I don't think it happened that late. He was due in Stanford on the 24th. So he must have, the only thing I can surmise is somewhere in his mind he thought, well, all the rich kids get to go to Daytona and Fort Lauderdale for spring break. I'm taking a spring break. I've been in school since I was 5 or 6. He was an older student too, by the way, because when he graduated high school, apparently he was 19 or something. I don't know. but he had spent a year at Puget Sound on a scholarship, and he gave it all back. He withdrew in March, which means he may have had some money for books and stuff. Another thing that's come up to my attention, this is off to the side again, is the money that he had when he went to Utah. He had a good job that summer with the emergency services, a fairly halfway decent good job, so he could have pocketed some money then. Liz was grateful that he was finally going to be a law student in her hometown, several states away, so she may have bothered her father to give some sum to help him. So he's got money from his job, he's got some money from Liz, and Carol Boone, the backdoor woman who was seeing him surreptitiously, she had just gone through a divorce. She had already been married once and divorced. She had a son. I guess he was about 10 at the time when she had her second divorce from Mr. Anderson. And I would imagine it may have been an amicable lump sum settlement. You have to have a settlement. So he may have been wealthy enough to say, here's $12,000. That's a large amount of money in 1974. But she may have said, okay, thank you. And since she was trying to get in the goods, because she loved Bundy, she was going to get in good with him, she may have been stupid enough to say, here, $3,000 or $4,000, which would have been a great deal of some. Because the reason I say that is because he bought a truck. Just let's put it in today's time. He bought a used truck to carry his goods to Utah. He had to have a tag for that truck. He had to have a new tag for his Volkswagen. He probably had to have first and last month rent. He had to have tuition money. He had to have book money. He had to change his driver's license. He had to have electricity. He had to have telephone. You have to have, he flew back to Seattle. That's why I suspect he was involved in the Virginia Helms murder, is because of the way he was doing things right and left. And he may have played cutesy tootsie with his charge card back then. It wasn't that hard to do. You go into that gas station in Murray. You talk to the clerk. You have a pocket full of money, a bucket load of money. So you buy gas for cash, and you say, "Look, I want you to run a charge card. Look, I'm going to give you $5. You can fill it up yourself. Fill your own car a couple times. I'm supposed to be here, but I'm going to be somewhere else. So if you'll just do that twice, I would be great." He may have done this about 4 times. 2 of them, the kid actually did it. And that would be, you had this thing, that you'd slide through. You put your sheet there and you just slide it through. So all he had to do was put it under the register or put it in his pocket. And then on the 25th and 27th, he slid the thing through. You could check. One of the things in my heart that I had hoped is somebody who is smarter, the smartest people involved in this investigation that are still alive are Mr. Simpson, Mr. Deckel, and Miss McChesney. There may be a few others, maybe Charlie Hill here in Jacksonville, that are still living. One of my hopes was somebody would actually try to investigate this. And, and they say, well, why did you go off on these wild hares? Because let me give an analysis. Let's say you're a little boy and you rode with your uncle he was an electrician. And it was way back in the 60s. And he had a teal truck and he had strawberry blonde hair and he was wearing a plaid shirt. And you're trying to remember because you said there was something about a sick horse. And you were going into town with your uncle because he was going to do something about a sick horse. So what would you do? You want to remember why he had the ride. You knew he didn't have horses. He had a little farm lot because it was a country and he might as well have some vegetables growing. He had a couple acres. He had some vegetables growing. And he was an electrician, though. And you think, why was he doing something about a horse? And so you're trying to go back and say, whose horse was it? Does some other relative have horses? And so you start saying, well, what kind of truck was that? Where in town would we have gone? You know what I'm saying? So you're trying to reconstruct a ride that happened 50 years ago. It's not that easy. I've told the plain truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And I'm imagining out of the 15 or 20 people that she tore down in her crazy schizophrenic way, I imagine 3 or 4 of those people were telling the absolute truth. And what's scary about her way of doing things is anybody that may have some information, she's going to try to knock them down. And I'm not in the best of health, and I don't like that. I really don't like what she did. Because I have told her, and as far as Debbie, she said, don't obsess about something that happened. That happened. Thank you. Bye-bye.